This is the Exposure Compensation Photography Podcast, hosted by Brandon.
Actually, can I be the Kanye of photography?
Kimber.
Bunnies are not that heavy. Have you ever held a bunny before?
Hayden.
I think when you are referring to micro themes, you're pretty much just calling a series something else.
And Toby.
I'm pretty sure people could rip my photos apart like super easy. Hello, everybody, and thank you for listening to the Exposure Compensation Photography Podcast. Today, we're going to be covering some news that came up over the past 2-ish weeks. It's been a decently quiet 2 weeks in the photography world. The main things we're going to be covering today, though, is going to be the new L-mount lenses from Sigma, the new Leica Q2 with a 47 megapixel sensor, maybe the same one as the S1R. And then we're also going to be looking at the rumored Nikon Z1. So does anything about these stories jump out at you guys?
Well, for me, I would prefer the Leica QT rather than the Leica Q2.
Oh my gosh.
So it's got a pretty impressive spec sheet. However, remember, it is still just a 47 megapixel full frame phone camera because it's a 28 millimeter fixed lens on it. Do you guys feel like you could do your professional work with that setup?
No, for sure not.
I could do some pretty good street photography, though, and that's really the main thing you use Leica for, right?
That's true. That is true. I know people are kind of excited about it, but I don't know. I mean, it has different like crop modes for 35 millimeter, 50 millimeter, and 75 millimeter. So it has the high resolution sensor to try to like give you more versatility in one lens. But like you said, that's essentially what a phone does to zoom in. So I don't know.
You lose all the compression, though. That's the big thing. Like, even lately, I've been thinking about switching from an 85 to a 135 millimeter lens, like to get a different like kind of compression rate, and you really don't even get any of that with a 28 mil. It's, I don't know.
Right.
How many megapixels do you think it is at 75 millimeters? Maybe like 15? Maybe?
Yeah, 12 to 15 probably would be my guess.
I mean, that's okay. Somebody, we're not going to name any names, went out and shot for an entire day in the crop mode on his A7 III and came back with 10 megapixel files. And they're actually more usable than you'd think. Like,
that is true, yeah.
Especially on these modern sensors.
How would you know that, Toby? Nothing. I was just giving you crap.
Yeah, that was actually hot tip, just like a free tip we're throwing into the news show. Before you go on like a big trip somewhere, just like take your camera out and shoot someplace kind of random. Maybe like if you have a park nearby, because it can just kind of make sure you don't have anything super stupid set up on your camera from video shoots.
That is actually really decent advice because like, especially if it's been a while, like you don't want to just show up to a place and need to be shooting under pressure and then like be fumbling with some weird setting that you have when you were messing with your camera in your house. Like it's a really good idea to go out and shake the rust off and get ready to shoot.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So just real quick for the Q2, before we go any farther, I figured I might as well read off kind of the highlight spec sheet for the Q2. So it's got the already mentioned 47.3 megapixel full frame sensor. It's got the 28 millimeter f1.7 lens, which is a pretty fast lens if you're going to be, stuck at 28 mil. It's got a 3.68 million dot OLED electronic viewfinder, which is really nice. It's got a 3-inch touchscreen. I believe it's mounted to the back. Yeah, so it doesn't articulate or like pull out at all. It does 4K at 24, 4K at 30p, Full HD at 120, which is pretty nice. ISO range of 50 to 50,000 at up to 10 frames per second shooting. The crop modes 35, 50, and 75. Bluetooth, it's weather sealed, all that good stuff. So would you guys spend $5,000 on this camera?
No.
I wouldn't under most circumstances, but let's say that I were a fine art photographer and I really wanted a strong camera body, because 28 mil, actually, like, as much as I hate to admit it, if you're going to choose a single focal length to do all your stuff from, 28 mil or 35 mil might be the focal length I would choose.
Right. Well, there's a reason it's the standard in phones. Like, they chose that for a reason, because it kind of does everything. It's not so wide that like things get distorted and it looks weird, but it's not so zoomed in that it's hard to compose. So there is a reason that 28 mil is on phones. It actually makes sense if for one focal length. So yeah, I mean, like, I guess my one counter to the like wanting to kind of make fun of it is that if I were a fine art photographer, if I were doing street photography, or if I were somebody who, not like a enthusiast, but somebody who maybe just didn't have like the need to, like, wasn't a portrait photographer, wasn't like a critical landscape photographer, like if you just did like cityscapes and different stuff and you shot in like black and white and stuff a lot, and megapixels didn't always matter, so you could crop in if you needed to. I mean, it is a nice camera. It's just that 28 mil only is a little like annoying, I guess. I don't know.
It's like the bougiest Instagram camera ever made, because you really would have 35, 50, and 75 on it for an Instagram camera, because it doesn't matter what your megapixels are really for Instagram. So to me, that kind of makes sense. But
what's really like frustrating is that, like, for how expensive it is, though, like, it's hard to justify, because you could get a Z7, which has the same megapixels exactly, and their new 24 to 70 that's coming out soon, and like you would be like, it would basically be the same price roughly.
Or I mean, if you want to think about it in terms of like trying to, well, I mean, that's similar, but like you could get the Sigma lenses, which are going to be kind of the same lenses for that. Well, for the new Leica whatever systems anyways. So if you did like A7R Mark III, so that's like 3,000-ish. And then you could do like 4 really good primes with that, like going from like 20 to 135 if you really wanted to. And then you have a full range of like really fast low light primes.
Or you could even do the A7 I and the 28 millimeter f2 and get an extremely similar camera. Not as many megapixels, obviously, but also a camera that is literally a fifth, like a whole setup that's under a fifth of the price. So,
but it doesn't have 4K, Toby. Ruins it for me.
Oh yeah, Brandon, with all those films you shoot there, eh?
Although you could, in reality, get the A7R, and you'd be doing a little bit more similar.
That's true. Like, I'm sure that if you got to shoot with this camera, like this would be the kind of camera that would be really fun to shoot with for a day, because I'm sure it's like a Leica thing that it's, you know, I'm sure that it feels incredible in the hands and like the whole 9 yards, but that in that way, and like feels really expensive. Like Kemper has an old Leica. Oh gosh, I can't remember which model it is, but it's like from the 40s, probably, maybe even a little earlier than that. And like even like that long ago, like it feels incredible. Like it's literally just like a chunk of metal in your hand, and that's, you know, doesn't feel flimsy at all. So I guess that's partially, it's kind of a work of art, so that's why people buy it. But I mean, right, it is supposed to be a tool, not a work of art in itself necessarily.
I mean, like, it's not supposed to exist beyond itself, but it definitely, like, your tools can be works of art, like, in a general sense.
No, I agree with that, yeah. I guess it's just kind of like, for me, like spending money on it, I'd much rather have more than this.
Yeah. I mean, it's not the practical option, but it is maybe a fun, and depending on who you are, a okay-ish option if you have a lot of money or are a dentist.
Right. Or are a dentist, right? Well, and I think that is what it is. I mean, Leica fully embraces their clientele. Like, it's camera enthusiasts, not. I think there's a difference between a camera enthusiast and a photography enthusiast. They want to have like this really cool camera for people to enjoy using and take. Honestly, I don't think Leica's like, you're not going to really do more than just like street photography and snapshots and stuff. They embrace it, and like, what does it really do for us to be annoyed about it? Not a whole lot, because they know who's going to buy this camera. Those people will buy that camera and they will love that camera, and that's kind of that.
I mean, imagine you're going through Europe or something. Like you're you're not a travel photographer in the sense that you're trying to make money necessarily off your prints, although you maybe could. And you're traveling through like different old towns in Europe. This might actually be like the perfect camera for that, to not have to fumble around with other lenses, and you just have this nice, clean, low light when you need it.
Right. I mean, it definitely has its place. It's not that it doesn't. It's just, for how much money it is, it's hard. It would be hard to justify for like a pro photographer who would need, a bunch of different things that it doesn't have, like the ability to go wider than 28. Although you could take panos, and a 28 pano, you could actually get pretty wide. So, who knows? Like, it seems like it's kind of a versatile little thing.
It's not a practical camera, but I would argue that maybe it could be like a more artistic camera or something like that. I don't know.
Yeah.
Anyways, let's probably move on.
All right. So in other news, not Leica, although Leica is involved in this, the, how does J-Pole say it? The L-Mount Alliance got a full set of native primes from Sigma, just their same old set of primes, just with the L mount. And then also the MC21 adapter, which adapts all of Sigma's other glass for Canon mount or for Sigma's native mount over to all the L mount cameras. So some of the Leica's cameras, and then of course the S1 and S1R from Panasonic.
Right, which low key, like the MC11, like adapts most other Canon glass too. So it's, it's like they're like, oh, you can now adapt the Canon mount Sigma glass. And it's like, yeah, but there's nothing to really stop you from mounting, actual Canon glass on there too. So I think it's kind of actually a boom for the Leica S1 and S1R, that their lens choices just exploded basically, because you have all the new Siggies, and then you can adapt Canon on there now too. So, it's kind of a big, and this is much sooner in the life cycle than it was for Sony, that there was a legit adapter for Sony. So, it's probably going to help them get off the ground, I would think.
Yeah, my concern actually with the whole, like that whole alliance or whatever you want to call it, is that it's going to be super cool. Like they're going to have like all of this great stuff, and then I feel like people could just ignore it. Like kind of, it just never catches, and people are just like, it gets ignored. I don't know. That would be my concern for them.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a pretty legitimate concern at this point, considering, they're just getting off the ground. I know that, like, I've been, like, watching YouTube videos of people using it, and they really are liking it. They're liking that it feels like a DSLR, but kind of has the mirrorless, a lot of the benefits of mirrorless with the kind of the ergonomics of a DSLR, which I think people really like. Although, using the Nikon Z cameras, I'm more waning on does it have to be big to be comfortable, because the Z cameras really are super comfortable and they're not that big. So, but I do think there still is a lot of benefit in having a big camera. So, it just in your hands is substantial.
I mean, it gives you a lot of options now. That's really what we have. Like, we live in a world where you can shoot small body Sony. All of them have little problems, and all of them have really good benefits.
Right.
You shoot Z-mount, which is an in-between. You can't shoot Canon mirrorless just because you can't.
Yeah, stop doing that.
Yeah.
Like, we're joking.
Hashtag sponsor us, Canon.
Well, I mean, like, legit though, like, I don't know, like, Canon has really cool lenses, but their bodies are just, like, in comparison, it's kind of a little bit of a joke.
Yeah.
I still kind of think that maybe Canon's doing that. I'm not going to say on purpose, because I don't think Canon's bodies are ever going to, like, blow us away.
They'd really never have historically anyways.
Well, they have, but it's been a long time since Canon's been like the forerunner, but they did pioneer video in a DSLR and
Right.
that kind of thing. They did it in a firmware update. Like what version of Canon was that? Like I don't even know. But that being said, you look at the EOS R and it's still a very capable camera if viewed in a vacuum. It's just the problem is the A7 III, the Z6, and the S1 all are like either a few $100s cheaper or a few $100s more expensive and just so much better in most ways. I do suppose that the EOS R is the king of 1080p vlogging, though.
Right, except that it doesn't have IBIS. There's just these things missing from the Canon mirrorless cameras that you're just it's like IBIS in a mirrorless camera right now, in-body image stabilization. I'm sorry, we're using an acronym like everyone knows exactly what we're talking about, but like it honestly should be a given that's in a camera, like a mirrorless camera. There's just not a lot of reasons not to. And Canon's apparently like, no, there's plenty of reasons not to, and we're not going to do it in our camera that retails for a little bit more than the A7 III. It just, I don't know. It's kind of frustrating. But then they have all these really cool lenses,
That makes it really tempting, and you want Canon to have just this stellar body. Like it should be such a powerhouse, but in this case, like maybe the S1 slips in for what Canon's supposed to be doing if they don't act quick enough.
Like, can you imagine like just look at like the Z7. Take those same stats, put them in a Canon body with those lenses, and Canon would be dominating. Like they straight up would. No one would be competing with them because they have, those fantastic lenses. They have the adapting over to the old stuff, and you have this really good camera that kind of pulls it all together. But they don't. Like it's just kind of frustrating.
I guess it could be that they're just trying to get out of, like, I think there's still a part of Canon, and we could be wrong, and Canon's strategy is completely different. Like they really are putting everything they can into these cameras, but I think honestly Canon wants there to be deal breakers with the EOS R, because I think that in Canon's head, everyone basically just thinks of Canon or Nikon and all of their buyers won't switch, which I guess when you think about a photographer in general, I don't know how wrong they actually are on that. I mean, every non-photographer I know still doesn't even know Sony's in the game, really. Like they still think it's just Canon and Nikon. And, they don't know that there's mirrorless systems out.
Yeah, I mean, it depends on what generation of people you're talking to, but I agree with you.
Well, yeah, I mean, like my wife, like she does not know. She thinks Canon or Nikon is what you shoot with. Like just recently we asked her and Toby was like, yeah, I'm Sony. Like, and she's like, oh, I think I heard something about Sony one time. So, it's kind of funny. Like, and I think Toby, your girlfriend was the same thing. She was like, oh, like I didn't know Sony made cameras.
Yeah, that's exactly was her reaction. And I don't know, like I just think that Canon's looking at the situation and they're like, we want to sell EF 70 to 200 2.8 Mark IIIs, and we want to sell more 5D Mark IVs, and we don't want to be pulling away from that. And I think, honestly, you can make a really big argument that that's a mistake on Canon's part, because like Kemper said, there's a ton of photographers picking their systems for possibly a really long time now.
We're in a really, like, this doesn't happen very often because both Canon and Nikon changed mounts at virtually the same time. You have a lot of people who are, when they're looking to upgrade, they're kind of free to pick their pony. Like, like if you're Canon, if you're shooting Canon right now, it's not going to be nearly as hard to switch to any of the other brands, including Nikon, but really Sony. Like if you're shooting Canon glass, because you can adapt to Sony too. And I don't think Canon is taking it that seriously that people are actually doing that. And I know for a fact they are.
Yeah, like no, for me, I've had like 10, 15, closer to 15 people switch to Sony after using my body. Like one of the guy I went to California with, Phil, he was shooting, or he originally was going to get the D850. He was shooting an older Nikon at the time, but when he used my camera, like with my 35mm from Sigma, he was like, oh crap. He went home the same day and bought it, which is insane. And most people aren't that crazy, but like I've had, I don't know, like 15-ish people switch to Sony just because they like see my camera or they like my work and they like, oh, Sony, what's that? And then they look into it a little bit and then they're like, oh, wow. So if that's happening literally just from like my small influence, like there's going to be some other big things coming. So I don't know. I also do think, to add to Canon's thing, like in their defense lately anyways, using lenses as their like first thing to do, like lenses last forever, bodies don't. So bodies will be outdated. So if they're working on getting the glass set up, these lenses will be relevant in 10, 15 years.
Right. I absolutely agree with that. I think, though, that that is absolutely true. And like, I kind of wish that people would pick their system based off of that. But the truth is that people are picking their system right now based off the cameras that are out right now, because that's just how our brains work, is that we're going to look at what the cameras can do, and that's what we're going to do. So I think that someone right now who's like, okay, I'm ready to jump to mirrorless, they're going to look at what the different camera bodies can do, and they're going to be like, well, Canon has some cool lenses, but Sony just makes so much more sense because their cameras can do so much more. Like, and in theory, Canon will eventually add usable 4K and in-body image stabilization and like all this stuff that like is been in mirrorless cameras now forever that they just won't do. But, in theory, they will add that, but they don't have it now. And I think a person looking to buy a camera is going to, notice that and choose something else.
Well, and that's what probably gives the S1 or like that series anyways right now such a probable chance. I do feel like there's still that slight concern that people just overlook it because Sony came in pretty like hot, I guess, and it was the new thing, but just another random camera system coming in that's maybe not as easy to just be like, oh wow, what's this?
I think that what's difficult about the S1 and S1R is that as cameras, they're not the best for everything, but as overall cameras, they're really compelling. But the contrast only autofocusing system is going to hold them back a bit.
Well, I think it could be cool for some photographers. Like, I don't mind contrast only. I mean, I'm fine with my A7R Mark III, and really, phase is as good as you want anyways, but just that, like, it will hit focus no matter what, like the 100% accuracy of contrast focus.
Oh yeah, there is something to that. You're not going to track sports and stuff, but the truth is like there's not that many people out there who need the super tracking, but they want it's kind of, to me, a little bit that kind of thing is the people who buy the really fast cars that they will never ever be able to drive them that fast,
Yeah.
They just want their car to be able to. I'm not a car guy, so like someone else could tell me what a really fast car that someone would buy that like they'll never ever they'll never ever be able to use it. They'll never be able to use that speed, but they know that and they're fine with it, but they want to own a car that can. And I think that's what people are a little bit that way with cameras too. They're like, oh, well, I would like to own a car that I can shoot sports with and that I can shoot wildlife with, even though the chances are that you'd never do that. And like anybody who's really still doing that is using DSLRs anyway. I guess there's some A9 shooters out there, but most people are using D5s and 1DXs like to really, really do that. So anyway.
Yeah, I don't know. For me though, I kind of halfway thought about switching to like the S1, or what's the higher megapixel? Is that the S2?
S1R.
S1R, okay.
Yeah.
Just because it looks like a really nice thing. And for portrait stuff, it'd be really good. Like the contrast detect would be, you're going to nail focus. Like that's a nice thing with it, but it's just, I would maybe in theoretically, but I don't really need to, so I'm not going to, but
I'd like to watch some more info on it and see actually how people are getting their copies now. I think they're really fully shipping in early April, but I know that people are, and I'd like to see some use cases and to actually see how the autofocus is working.
Mm-hmm.
So should we talk about the rumored Z1? Everyone was calling the Z5 until suddenly it was the Z1.
Yeah, so not surprising, like Canon and Nikon have a tendency to do. The Nikon's going to need to answer the Canon RP. So we don't have a lot of information at all, except for actually a possible photo of the Z1, which we'll link in the show notes, of course, for you to look at. Do you guys all have that photo in front of you?
Yes.
Okay, perfect. So it looks basically like a more plasticky version of the Z67 body. No top LCD, although it does look like it might have like one of the old 70s, 80s LCDs in like a spot I've never seen before, like in front of the viewfinder.
Like right in front of the viewfinder. I mean, I can't tell for sure if that's a screen, but if it's not, it doesn't make any sense. I think it's a screen.
Yeah, it was for sure full frame from the photo. It's for sure, of course, Z mount, all that stuff. I mean, they're not going to release just a random DX camera, I don't think, when they don't have anything wider than, well, I guess they actually do have a decent DX lens with the 16 to 30 f4, but they're not going to do that. I don't think either Canon or Nikon are doing APS-C.
Mirrorless. No, I don't think so.
My question is what do you guys think they're going to compromise on? I have 3 ideas of things they could compromise on and still outplay the RP, but what do you guys think?
I don't know if this is what they will do, but theoretically, this is what I think would be the best case to do. And just have really bad video, like just have 1080p, basically barely do video that's like, I mean, you could do professional work with 1080p, but just none of that extra 4K, maybe no 120, just have flat 120 or just have flat 1080p.
Right. No, I think it all comes down to does Nikon have a killer instinct right now? Like, I understand that they don't want to undercut the Z6, but like, honestly, if they just I think that you have a lot of the same basic features of the Z6, the same megapixels, maybe even the same video features. You just put it in a really compact body without a joystick, without like some of the other function buttons and all that stuff, and take $500 off, and I think you've got a camera that's really going to intrigue a lot of people.
Yeah, see, my 3 things I would say they should have taken off is the video, like maybe not bad video, just not as good a video, like take 4K out or something. The buttons, like joysticks and stuff, just kind of make it a like simpler body, and then maybe no in-body stabilization or something, like just to cheapen it up, like to make it so, I mean, it depends on how practical for them, like as a company though, like if they can take in-body stabilization out and sell it for like $700 less, then it makes a lot of sense. I don't know.
What do you think, Toby?
So my thoughts are, I actually think that there is a massive hole in the market for a really stellar 1080p modern camera. And Canon's been essentially doing everything they can to almost make this camera and miss it with both the RP and the 6D Mark II. Because for like YouTubers, people who are going to be shooting video with a camera that price that's still focused, like they're doing YouTube videos and stuff like that. So I think you leave every video feature in the camera except 4K. So that includes what's it called? N-Log? Is it N-Log?
Mm-hmm.
So leave N-Log, leave IBIS, leave your autofocusing system, just everything but 4K, because that leaves like a massive selling feature for the Z6 people will buy, but it doesn't actually affect the effectiveness of the Z1 from like a YouTube, Instagram perspective. It's more of a prestige perspective that it actually hurts it. I think you remove weather sealing because that's another thing people are willing to pay for, but a lot of people don't actually need.
Mm-hmm.
And you don't have to make a huge deal about it. Like it's one of those features you kind of have to look into to know for sure. You can say like splash resistant or something like that, whereas the Z6 is like super weather sealed. This camera is not so much. And then the last thing is literally just the thumbstick. just lose the thumbstick and have it just be touchscreen based. And I think you can sell that camera for $14.99. It does not really, I mean, it'll slow Z6 sales to some degree, but I think in reality, it'll just open up so many people to that system. And I don't think they need to remove anything else.
What I think they need to do, at least in like their grand scheme of things, is get people to switch over from their crop cameras, like their DSL crop cameras, and start getting them into the mirrorless system, because that's a market that I don't think Canon and Nikon necessarily think about. So maybe that's what Canon was doing with theirs. I don't know. Like Sony has done a really good job of somehow getting people into higher end. Like even the A7 III is like such a good camera, and people have been very willing to just jump into that. But I think Canon and Nikon need to kind of push people a little bit more into like getting that kind of camera. So, and maybe that's what this will be.
Right. I think that's actually a pretty good bet, Tobe, is that like they could just take the 4K out. What I actually think though is my guess is that it will still have 4K. It's not going to have the IBIS, which is a little sad, but I think that's what it's going to be. It's going to be a smaller, less feature rich body with 4K, but not IBIS. So that's just my guess.
I mean, I agree from a marketing standpoint, that's a smart move. I disagree from a usability standpoint, which is obviously kind of irrelevant when making a camera. Like, it's going to hurt this camera sales to be $100 more and not have 4K. But if anyone looks into it at all, they will know that it's better than the RP, so much better if it has IBIS. And also, their lenses aren't stabilized.
That's a good point. That Nikon's pretty much committed to non-stabilized lenses, and that would be for a consumer camera to not have stabilized lenses. So that's a good point. I bet it actually then it almost has to have IBIS then.
Well, no, in reality, though, the people that are going to buy this camera, they're not going to be putting themselves into situations where they really, really care. Like, maybe they'd like it, but to have to shoot at a little bit higher shutter speed probably is not going to kill a lot of people that would buy this camera.
Right.
That's my thought anyway.
You're giving people a little too much credit, though, because most of the people who are going to be buying a camera like this are going to they're going to be like, why are my pictures blurry with this camera? And like Nikon has to legitimately worry about that. People buying it and then writing reviews on bestbuy.com about how none of their pictures are sharp because they don't know how the exposure triangle works.
Yeah, you're right.
Many people do that on Best Buy. They're like, my pictures are blurry. I took it back and they won't take it back. Something's wrong with it.
Something's wrong with my camera. It will take blurry pictures. So I actually think that like Canon and Nikon especially have to worry about that people will buy this camera, have no idea how to use it, and then they have to babysit those people a little bit more so than Sony, because I feel like if you're really interested in Sony, you're already a pretty savvy photographer to some degree. I think there are people who buy the A6000, but again, the A6000 comes with that little pancake lens that's super stabilized. So when Toby said that like none of their lenses have stabilization, I'm like, oh yes, okay. So this one almost has to have IBIS.
Yeah, that's fair. I didn't think of
Which means that Nikon has the opportunity here to release a Z6 with just a little bit less functional body. And I actually think that would mean it would really put Canon in a tough spot. Like if it's a Z6 without a jump joystick and it's $1,500, that's going to really affect the RP.
Yeah, that's fair. I mean, the RPs, I feel like a teeny bit doomed because it's just, I don't know. I don't know what you use it for.
The RP and the A7 III, honestly, because the Z6 and the Z and the A7 III are kind of on the same plane. But you put out a camera like this that is like essentially an A7 III with not quite as good of a body, and like that could have Sony sweating too. So
I mean, the A7 III, what it has going for it, like you're not wrong in the theoretical realm, I guess, but in practicality, there's like already this kind of like prestige to the A7 III that I think at least gives Sony a teeny bit of a like cushion, but Canon does not have any kind of prestige with their mirrorless system yet, and that's more what's going to really continue to hurt them.
All right, I think that's all we have time for today. Thank you so much for listening. If you enjoyed, make sure to subscribe to us on your favorite podcasting app, and check out the show notes for links to all the sources and articles for the stories we talked about today. And hopefully we'll talk to you next week with maybe a little bit more information about the Z1, or I guess we'll see what happens, huh?
Yep.
All
Say
right.
boy.
Bye.
Bye.
Boy.
Hello, everybody, and welcome to the Exposure Compensation Podcast news section. All right, this. Let's start the whole thing over again.